question. So, if we want to dismantle the current system, what kind of educational system do we want to create? Or what would a liberated school system look like, and how can teachers help create it?
I'm going to have a few things in the description box. The first one, it'll be where I got it from. A lady named Karlyn, and I'm not even going to make a fool out of myself trying to pronounce her last name. Underneath that video will be the original video that she was reviewing. And underneath that video will be a video I did a while back where I was talking about this dude named Crimson that did a video about me because I was on this comment boards questioning his communism. The video is titled Alexandria Ocasio Cortez Met Gala Dress. And about at the 42-minute mark, and yeah, I went and checked. About the 42-minute mark, he got real weird. And I'm going to play where he started from, then I'm going to jump to where he starts to talk about what he was showing on the screen with the media outlets and everything.
Now, if you actually take a look at it, let me just make it bigger. The media companies, there were in 1983, 90% of the media was owned by 50 companies. In 2011, 90% were controlled by 6 companies. 6 companies. GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Now we know that's actually gotten a little bit smaller. And the sad part about it is that feeds into people wanting to look in other places, look in other areas to try to find their news, to find their opinions. And you're getting this. Now, I'm not to say that it's not to say that Disney Fox Studios. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't look outside of the mainstream media to find information. I'm not a news program. I'm commentary. But there's some great news companies outside of the mainstream media. But you have to know how to vet this. And that's the thing. A lot of people don't know how to vet information. And it's leading to awkward, if any, discussions around those holiday dinner tables. I don't know. It's time to stop trying to get our news sources from different places and leading to different realities. But what can you do?
Did you hear him complaining about people who have the nerve to look somewhere other than the mainstream for news? You saw him put that character from The Simpsons on there. You saw him and all that discomfort and sadden over people having options. You heard him say that we need to stop people from having different realities. Right, and never mind the part where he said that he's not saying that people shouldn't look outside the mainstream media. Never mind that, because he's lying. That's exactly what he was saying. And another part I talked about in the Met Gala video, I asked, did you hear him with his eyes and ears on what people are discussing at their dinner tables?
But for me, that core is how do we create a learning environment that's comfortable and where I can feel seen.
And to that, I would add, just in addition to seeing our young folks, is also listening to our young folks, because a lot of what I'm seeing specifically at Central is my students are leaving high school out proud, is existing as who they've always been, which I think is fantastic. So by the time they get to me and they say, okay, Eric, Mr. Eric, this is who I am. It's my job to just say, okay. And we move forward as such. And I think that a lot of times, specifically in a lot of POC communities, but speaking specifically to Black communities, when we talk to young folks, we try to shelter them away from conversations about sexuality and try to frame it as, I just want to keep my kids away from sexuality in general. I just want to make sure that my children aren't exposed to sexuality. But there's good sexuality, right? There's good ways to have these kinds of conversations so that we are seeing our young folks, but we're also promoting their own education to learn about themselves, learn about their bodies, learn about who they are, right? Instead of shaming them for it. So it kind of softens the blow and culture shock of college, because we know once they get to college, the reinvention happens. And that's great. That is fine. It's part of my job. But I think if we can really tackle the K-12 system and really foster, that feeling of belonging and seeing and listening, by the time they get to me, it can be more of a more cohesive identity development rather than like, I have no idea who I am. Help me figure it out.
The man said that they need to get to the children before they get to him. He's a college teacher of some sort. And of course, in the panel discussion was the advocacy for critical race theory. And I say all the time that critical race theory's intentions are not what people think they are. Its intentions are really up to no good.
I really enjoy seeing how you all see yourself represented in the movement. I see we have one more question. What do you see or anticipate as the biggest challenge facing queer students of color? Because this could either be from personal experience or from observation as they work in the anti-racist movements.
Eric, you go ahead.
And this kind of bleeds into what I was going to talk about for my question, so I won't expound too much on it, but I think a lot of what queer students of color, Black students, queer students face is the classic twofold. I'm Black and I'm queer. So how do I function with those intersecting identities? Because it's not the most accepted in my community at home, and it's not accepted, both identities are not accepted to the outside world. So I think we're continuing to have to navigate which one do I choose conversation, right? And both are not tangible, right? We carry all of who we are with us. And I think just from observation and both my own experience, navigating that intersection is very challenging, and is going to continue to be challenging until we can get to a point where we can comfortably have the conversations at home and then unpack those conversations and then do the work with, critical race theory and such. Because I think, unfortunately, we're always going to have to do double the work. That's just the way that the system works. It's the way the system has been created for us, right? And part of dismantling that is really unlearning the white supremacy that has been taught to us. It's unlearning the ideals of gender. It's unlearning the ideals of sexuality, right? And really breaking the mold at home and having difficult conversations with mom, dad, brother, uncle, sister, guardian, whomever, and then moving forward to using those tools to dismantle the system. I really believe it starts at home, because I have students in my office, unfortunately, who are themselves, from August to December, and then they go home and then they're just like, I have to be who I was before I came to campus. And that breaks my heart, because I'm just like, you've got a taste of freedom, right? You've been living as you've always been. And now for this month of winter break, or these 3 months of summer, you have to live as someone that you're not. And I think that is a really challenging part. And then have to also be a student of color or a Black student and just have the world just naturally against you because of, systemic oppression and white supremacy. So then it's just like, well, how do I manage? But I think that really working that out and dismantling at home is part of the start.
Dismantling the home. those dinner tables. And if you go hear the entire discussion, you'll hear a lot of queer this and queer that.
I think that's a big question. I think a liberated education system just calls for the big conversations that are happening outside of the classroom and, with the administrators and the instructors, but also is calling for just a change in curriculum, a reformation in curriculum, representation in curriculum, but then also just a place where students can exist unapologetically as themselves. I think a lot of times, while so much has changed since I was a kid and since I was in college, there's so much more room for us to make room for, diverse students, including the invisible identities as well. But I think it just has to come with the acknowledgement that not all of my students are going to, be cisgender. Not all of my students are going to be heterosexual. Not all of my students are, going to be neurotypical, right? Expecting the unexpected so that when you get it, you're just like, all right, I was prepared for this. And even when you get something that you haven't prepared for, it's just like, all right, how do we adapt? Let's go look at the IEPs. Let's go look at the parental documents. Let's involve the parents, right? If the parents aren't available or don't want to be involved, let's find some other resources to help this kid, right? So there are many ways that liberation can happen. I just think we have to be committed to it. And being committed to it means that we're putting people who are committed in, the Board of Ed, and because it all starts with senior leadership. I cannot do anything if I don't have senior leadership behind me. And so once we get that together, I don't know when that will be, hopefully it's soon, but once we get that together, then we can really start the trickle down effects.
Start the trickle down effects. These people are hosting these meetings all over the country on how to confiscate people's kids. And kids are only part of it because ultimately their aim is to have everything belong to the state. Confiscate the kids, private property, free thought, all of it.
I was totally pour my energy, even my life into it to support whatever Mao asked me to do.
Mao had decided to mobilize the young people as the driving force of a vast campaign to purify the Communist Party. There was to be a new revolution, a cultural revolution, a revolution in people's thinking.
We went to Beijing. Mao received us after we arrived. We walk out in the middle of night because in the morning we are going to walk through Tiananmen Square to see our great leader. It was exciting. We thought he was a god.
Inspired by Mao, the Red Guards went wild in their enthusiasm to keep the revolution alive. They worship Mao as their leader and follow his instructions without question. They consider long hair and Western-style clothes uncommunist.
Teachers were the target of the political campaign. Mao taught us they have to receive the re-education by the worker and peasant. My female teacher, I love. She liked to wear beautiful clothes. She cared for appearance. There was a criminal accusation. One boy went to her bedroom and lead so many people. She went there to cut her hair. I went there too late. The hair has been cut already. He was humiliated, and I couldn't help. I couldn't rescue her. Shame on me. Shame on me.
That was a man who fled Mao's regime. He was recalling when he was part of Mao's Red Guard as a child. Mao's wife, Zhongqing, she was in charge of the kids. She's the one that reshaped the culture through them, through the kids. Same thing these people here are doing.
Sit.
Nothing more than that.
And talk with me. Eat. drink.
And there are probably only a few of these people that has a clue about what's really going to happen to them.
When you get to the end of the book, you'll realize everything is about to change. How I eat, how I dress, what I say, how I pick my job. Do I get to pick my job? My kids in school, they're going to be fast-tracked. Will they get to pick their own career? Everything is changing.
So when you say this, you obviously are talking about the Great Reset, which was a phrase that if we were to utter, say a year ago, people would say you were conspiracy theorists. But as everyone knows, yesterday's conspiracy theorist is now today's truth teller. You've been warning about sort of all of this stuff forever. I think the first time that we sat down, which is probably about 5 years ago now, I said I used to watch you on Fox. You'd have the board behind you, and I'd go, and you'd be scribbling all this stuff and running across the room and the whole thing. And I'd be going, this guy is half genius, half crazy, half entertainer. And I know that that's three halves, but there was just a lot there. But you really have been sort of tracking all of this from the financial system to the political system and everything else. So I guess where did you, like in retrospect, I suppose, looking back now, do you see a moment when you first started putting the pieces together for some of this stuff?
Yeah. So I started putting the pieces together, and I didn't know what I was dealing with up until about a year and a half ago. I mean, I thought we were dealing with socialists, and we're not. The socialists are being used. Anybody who's a Marxist, boy, are you going to be pissed when they finally show up.
Yeah.
That is cover to hide what's really going on, and I didn't figure that one out.
Because the people up top don't care about them either.
It's a moment of fantasized, as I said, sort of authorship, licensing. And since my family abolitionism is very much about the buried history of children's liberation, which you already raised, the idea that children, whilst they have very special sort of entitlements and needs, are people, and as such don't, belong to anyone as possessions, and are certainly not, and this is also just scientific fact, the extensions of anybody or the sort of reproductions of anybody. In fact, Marxist biologists are quite clear, Marxist feminist biologists are quite clear that, and I know you do eugenic science research yourself, Miranda, but the reproduction of the self is not something that actually happens in sexuate reproduction. It's a fantasy we have that is very central to the functions of the family that have to do with the transmission of class, of racial stability and racial identity, the administrative coherence of populations for the state, and so on and so forth, So I'll just stop there, shall I? It's not about sort of disliking, a particular gender of person. It's about recognizing that patriarchy is one of capitalism's primary functions, in the way that it kind of creates identities as part of the privatization of care.
The privatization of care is what she has a problem with. The title of that live stream is Capitalism, Socialism, Democracy. What is Family Abolition? A discussion with Sophie Lewis. The privatization of care is what we've had, but people of her movement believes that family should belong to the state. You heard her mention one of the tenets of Marxism, right? You did hear her say that children are not an extension of their parents, and that passing down genetics and DNA to your offspring is junk science, according to Marxist biologists and Marxist feminists. They don't believe in private property. They believe that all should belong to the state.
Ideological discourse, but again, used to be sort of a bigger political demand that I think radicals were making in maybe the 60s and the 70s. And so it comes up frequently in your book, but it's not always named. It's definitely there in spirit. Is children's liberation something that's sufficient for getting at the kind of freedom that you think of, that you're aiming towards with something like family abolition, or is there something that it lacks, or just a different emphasis? How do you sort of see those two conceptual frameworks related?
Children's liberation is an under-theorized tradition, although there is a lot on it. It perhaps is quite fitting that it's somewhat under-theorized because, children do not tend to theorize as much as else, that perhaps that's not true. Perhaps it's about the mode in which their theorizing occurs. But no, I wouldn't say they're synonyms at all. I would say that, the very vexed but crucial question of how children's autonomy can be nourished and supported and safeguarded at the same time as their care is ensured, is one of the central things that you need to be thinking about if you want to think about deprivatizing care, i.e., abolishing the family.
The deprivatization of care. Abolishing the family is what she said.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio Cortez.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what we're seeing here today is the Republican Party's attempt to take some of the most heinous legislation that we are seeing passed on the state level to attack our trans and LGBT, as well as people from marginalized communities, right to exist in schools. This flowery language of quote unquote parental rights and freedom hides the sinister fact of this legislative text. If you notice in these arguments, they are not really discussing what is actually in this legislation. It includes 2 provisions that require schools to out trans, non-binary, and LGBT youth, even if it would put said youth in harm's way. One of the highest rates of youth homelessness is in the LGBT community, from parents who want to kick their children out in households that may be unstable or abusive. For so many children of abuse, school is their only safe place to be. But before they claim that this is not about banning books and not about harming the LGBT community, let's just look at the impacts of similar Republican legislation that has already passed on the state level. Look at these books that have already been banned due to Republican measures. The Life of Rosa Parks. This apparently is too woke by the Republican Party. Song of Solomon is unacceptable to Republican politics. 40% of banned books have reported are significantly addressing and specifically addressing LGBT issues. To say and talk about government reach and freedom, this Republican bill is asking the government to force the outing of LGBT people before they are ready. And talking about the rights of parents in this gallery today, the National Parents Union is here saying, don't do this. I have a letter that I'd like to submit where they are asking the Republican Party to keep culture wars out of classrooms. Our children need urgent and aggressive educational solutions. The American Library Association coming out against this Republican proposal. When we talk about progressive values, I can say what my progressive value is, and that is freedom over fascism. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman.
What is the world coming to when tantrums are thrown at the idea of parents having a say in what their children are learning about in school? That was AOC having a hissy fit about a bill introduced by Republicans that would give parents the right to know. Because you know that teachers, they've been writing these laws and putting these guidelines in place that enables them to withhold from parents what they're doing to these kids in these schools. And you saw AOC, you saw her, she reached for the race card when she held up the Rosa Parks book. That's just a tactic to get people to stop thinking and start feeling. But you heard that her concern was overwhelmingly about the LGBT. That's why I described the Rosa Parks book as a tactic.
It sounds conspiratorial, but the first thing you have to know to understand is Build Back Better. When I first heard that, I didn't realize what it was. And it was Joe Biden's slogan to be elected. And I thought, who came up with Build Back Better? That is the worst slogan I've ever heard. And it's because that's not its original language. Now they're using Build Back Better for the Prime Minister of the UK, Prime Minister of Japan. They're using it in France. They're using it in Canada. It is the slogan of the Great Reset.
Is that the weird moment that we're in, that everything you're describing here sounds like a dystopian movie, most likely, or a book that was originally written by Philip K. Dick. But I mean, everything this sort of sounds like Minority Report. It sort of sounds like Terminator. It sort of sounds like iRobot. Like, we're rushing to Matrix for sure, that we're rushing towards it. We all have had all the warnings. The warning signs are all behind us. They were in books, they were in movies, they're in history, they're in the Bible, they're all there. And we're just rushing and we're all going, oh, let's keep going, because who's going to stop us?
Right, and we all kind of know, too.
Yeah,
we all feel
know
something. I don't care what political stripe you are. We all know something is really not right. This is not going to end well. We know it.